Hey everybody, welcome to the Better Student Ministry Podcast. My name is Jared Berry.
And my name's Mark Freeman, and together we have over 30 years of youth ministry experience.
We created this resource to be of value to you and your youth ministry team. Hopefully you enjoy it, you benefit from it. Our goal is to invest in you as youth leaders so that you can invest in your students.
If you found this useful, please like and share with as many people as possible so that we can see better student ministries.
Welcome back, everybody, to Better Student Ministry Podcast. So glad you're with us. My name's Jared.
My name's Mark, and we're excited to be able to spend the next couple of who knows how many minutes.
Could be hours.
Could be days.
Days.
I hope not. You've got a lunch appointment.
48-hour, 2-day live stream where we just talk about one topic.
We put our hand on something, and whoever takes our hand off of it first
wins it.
Or no, that'd be the other way around.
I love it. Yeah. It's good to be back, man.
Yeah, man, absolutely. And we're in a different setup. I mean, same studio, different setup. Yeah. Hopefully we like it. Hopefully you like it. Yeah. If you're just listening to us, then you have no idea anyways.
I feel more relaxed.
Right?
For one.
Yeah.
You know, I feel ready to talk.
I hope you're not too relaxed.
Yeah. No, I mean, if I start nodding off, okay. You know, just... No, I'm excited, man. I'm excited to get back in here. It's been a little time in between episodes. Part of that was because of what we're doing in here. And yeah, we had some massive youth events, which both of us were part of, which were great. And so, but I'm excited to talk this morning. So recently, you and I were both breakout speakers at a conference, different topics, and I heard you talk about some of the dangers when it comes to social media technology with the next generation.
Sure, just the digital world in general is kind of one way to frame it too, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And so we felt like, you know, I listened to it. It was great. And of course, this topic is so important for anybody, whether you're working with teenagers in youth ministry, if you're a parent, a grandparent, you know.
It's helpful even for the individual. Like even when I was preparing for, you know, sharing this topic, there were some things that I was like, oh, this is actually really helpful for me to digest and understand so that I know how I show up in the digital world, so to speak.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. For all of us. So we want to kind of talk about that a little bit today. And one of the things when you started out that was surprising to me, I think we all kind of have the sense of like, yeah, it's pretty bad out there. Like the world has really changed and become so much more digital. And maybe we kind of have a sense of like, we're always like, I should be on my phone less. But you shared some statistics as to kind of the reality that were shocking even to me as someone who's worked in next gen for a long time.
Yeah.
So give us number one, give us kind of a picture of what the reality is. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on as you were opening this up, like what did it mean to you, you know?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that's important even to start is you may have half joked, half serious at the beginning, identified that the digital space is this dangerous world, right? The reality is that it's neither dangerous nor beneficial in and of itself, but it's how we show up there. It's what we do while we're there. It's what we're gaining from it. It's how we navigate that space that then has the proclivity to either make it useful or to potentially make it dangerous in our lives. Yeah. And so some of these statistics are not necessarily, they're shocking, and they're important to be aware of just how much time is spent in the digital world, how much time is spent in front of screens. The statistics themselves are not necessarily bad. It's what happens as a result of, or when we're there, what's going on. So for example, too, one of the things that I found out was pre and post COVID pandemic, numbers in the digital space have skyrocketed over that span of 3 years. Some of that was out of necessity because everything went online as it relates to work and school, things like that. But what we found, what has been found now in the years that have followed is some of those numbers have not really settled back down. We have adapted to that new world and we have kind of stayed there. Yeah. And everything that all these companies and all the organizations are migrating with digital in mind. And so that's why it's important for us to understand, okay, there's some significant presence in the digital world, and we need to understand what's happening in there. So just a couple of those quick statistics. So on average, this is this would be kids/students/teenagers ages 8 to 18 was the demographic of the study of Stanford I saw, said that they spent 7 hours and 22 minutes in front of a screen a day. 7 hours. So whether it's schoolwork, whether it's free time, play,
Yeah.
things like the average. So now obviously there's some that's way above that. There's some that's way after that, some days more than others. But what's crazy to think about, like when I think 7 hours, that sounds like a lot. Like I recognize that's a lot of waking hours in front of some sort of digital screen. But that's 43% of their waking hours. So almost half of their waking life is spent in front of some sort of screen. So to pretend that this digital world is not a factor for us I mean, not that many people are, but it's pretty crazy to think about that.
And I think one thing to put that in perspective too is we have no idea what impact this is really going to have on humanity, because this is, in the big picture, this is very new.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, the internet came out in, I don't know,
when did Dale Quayle make it?
It's in the big scheme of things.
Yeah.
What, in the last 30 years or so? Like, and then when you talk about the iPhone was what, 2007? I think the iPhone came about.
Yeah.
So social media didn't even exist at that point. Like, so the idea of this problem, as you're going to share some more stuff with us, like, we have to understand, we don't know what looking at these devices for 8+ hours a day is going to actually do to us.
And to your point, scientifically, we're only just now starting to figure out what is this doing to our brains, because we have not had enough data to really aggregate what's happening. And some of those statistics, which I think we'll get into here in a little bit as well, is we'll find out. So one of the statistics that I shared was 85% of parents of kids ages 1 through 12 admitted that they use digital time or space in front of their computer as a way of just occupying the time of their kids, right? The other 15%, they lied about it, right? So like the idea that like this isn't it's just a means of entertaining their kid to, like, I mean, I certainly am guilty of it as well, right? Like, you know how much more peaceful like our time at a restaurant is if my kid is watching a phone or something versus, who knows, messing with the salt on the table or building who knows what out of their utensils, right?
Absolutely.
But all that to say is there is this tension, and yet in adults, as parents, we're like, this is just a part of the world that we live in now, right? So communication obviously is a big piece of the digital world, being able to talk back and forth, text messaging now being the primary form of communication for a lot of teenagers. So 50% of teenagers send at least 50 texts per day. 1 out of every 3 send over 100 texts per day, and 15% send 200 texts per day.
I'd be curious to know what percentage is that of their overall communication.
Oh, absolutely. I imagine it's a significant
like,
percentage of their overall.
It's quite possible that teenagers are communicating more to each other digitally through text than they are actually in person having a conversation.
Sure. And I'm the same way. Like, I would way rather text somebody something, especially if it's not urgent. I'm like, they'll get to it when they get to it, versus to call them up and not gonna have a 5-minute conversation when really I just needed your response from something. And so to some degree, you know, that speaks to, I just need information from you. I don't really care about the relationship piece necessarily, at least in this moment or whatever it is.
Well, and at the very least, you're missing a lot of significant aspects to communication, like seeing someone's face and
seeing how they're doing,
hearing their voice inflection and tone. Like,
I mean, how many times have you sent a text or received a text from somebody and you're like, well, that seems intense, but it's just it's either how you were feeling at the moment, how you interpreted the text, or you're like, you know, the idea of like texting in all caps is like shouting at somebody now and stuff like that. It's so funny to me. Not surprisingly, females have a much higher number of texts than boys.
How dare you?
Well, it's not really a bad thing. They're better communicators.
You're trying to say that women tend to communicate more than men.
That is true. That's
all right.
But here's a sad statistic related to this: 400 fatal deaths, car crashes a year, directly related to text messaging. So this is a big deal. Distracted driving, all that kind of stuff for teenagers and adults, because it's not just a teenage statistic, is a really big deal. And so what we're modeling as adults, as parents, to our kids, to our teens,
right? And that's just fatal. That doesn't include.
Oh yeah, I'm sure there's many thousands of other accidents that haven't claimed life, but as a result, for sure. So. scary sorts of stuff. The average age for a kid getting a smartphone or device of some sort is 10.7 years old. So
Mm.
between 10 and 11 years old. One of the things I found really interesting in the statistics, one particular study that I was reading from Stanford was there was no direct correlation between the negative or positive effects of the digital space or getting a phone as it relates to age. It had way more to do with what they were doing and how they were navigating the digital world. So if the thought is, well, I'll wait till they're 13 because then it'll be less dangerous for them, the age that they started with it was insignificant compared to how they were using it and the access that they had and the types of apps or the types of services that they were using. So there was way more concern as it relates to helping to monitor what they're doing while they're on it than when they have access to it or started.
Yeah.
I'm at your son is starting to get to an age now and where you're like, okay, is he ready for a phone yet? What kind of device? Like as they get older, as they start to creep into middle school, you're like, okay, now they're on the bus, they're getting home. That's what the
Yeah.
conversation was for my wife and I with our oldest daughter. It was like, okay, she's getting home from the bus now, like an hour or two before we do. We'll get her a phone because then she can be in contact with us, or if there's an issue on the bus ride home or something
Sure.
like that. Have you had those conversations with Jen?
Yeah, I mean, my son is about to turn 11, so he's definitely at that age. But no plans to get him a phone anytime soon. But the reality is, like, I thought about that. It's like we're not gonna get him a phone, but his iPad is basically a phone,
Sure, right? Yeah.
including like
Being able to make
we
calls.
call all the time
Yep.
we FaceTime each other and
Yeah.
stuff. So the difference would be
It's amazing how how the shift in technology has even changed that conversation, right?
right. So you're not really doing much by him having an iPad instead of a phone. The difference is like if he's out, but in our family context, like he's not really in those moments where it feels like he would need a phone. And so no, we don't have any plans to get him anything anytime soon. But I also am fully aware that you know between his iPad and actually last night I was setting up a thing for him on our PlayStation and just going through, and of course that's a whole nother avenue of access to internet, and I'm going through all the parental controls and all the different stuff
Yeah,
you can,
absolutely. Yeah, that's something that we'll probably address in some recommendations a little bit later. You'd be surprised how many parents are unaware that there's web browsers on those gaming systems.
Yeah.
And for a lot of kids, like you lose your phone and they think, well, they're just messing around with a game. Well, they have access to basically everything that they had on their phone. They can also have access to now on their gaming systems as well.
Yeah.
And so just being aware of
Yeah.
that is a big deal.
I have an interesting fact on that later we'll talk
Okay,
about.
sounds good.
Remind me.
All right, I'll do my best. So this is where we start to have this conversation regarding, okay, so what are the effects then of this exposure? So there's a reality, there's a lot of exposure to the digital world. That's probably not a surprise to our audience. So now the statistics then prove that when you spend more than 3 hours a day online, that's when there seems to be a significant uptick in the emotional, physical, psychological damage that starts to take place. Again, a lot of that is going to be based on what you're doing in those digital spaces, but there does seem to be a link in the amount of time spent online as it relates to the effects thereof. So like, for example, they're starting to see some significant physical, medical effects as it relates to the amount of time spent online. So like things like eye strain, neck problems, neck problems are skyrocketing because, well, what are we doing? We tend to like slunk our head down while we're looking at our phone or our device, and it's creating all sorts of tension in people's necks, eye strain, sleep issues as it relates to the light and the interface with the screen. So that's creating all sorts of physiological effects because we're getting less sleep. Even things like the need or the desire to stay online, which is causing us to have less sleep.
Right.
the high likelihood of teenagers and even young adults in the middle of the night waking up, checking their phones, seeing that they had a text or they missed something, or is affecting sleep patterns, is affecting
Yeah.
our bodies physically. And then of course there's a lot to be said about the psychological effects of being online and seeing the potential jealousy, the depression, the anxiety, the FOMO, fear of missing out, all those sorts of things
Right.
that have some significant mental psychological effects. Why are my posts not getting likes? Well, she looks so beautiful in this picture, why do I look the way that I do? The comparison
Yeah.
game, all those sorts of things. Now the amount of exposure and time spent in that mental space is having some significant effects mentally in the overall mental health of not
Yep.
just teenagers but young adults and adults as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course, the truth that world is not real. Like when you're looking at images, and this is only going to get worse because what they can do now with AI generated
Yep.
images, it's fake. Like
Yeah.
these filters, so people are looking at these pictures and
Yeah.
comparing their life to that.
Sure.
But the problem is they're comparing their real life to a fake one.
And a microsecond of that life.
Right.
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 Yeah.
Oh gosh, look at this. And so the more that if you're not careful, the more time you spend in that, of course, the more lonely you become.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to say, like, that sort of digital interaction and digital community has its benefits,
Yeah.
but it's not equal to actual physical community.
Relationship.
It
Yeah.
isn't. Like,
No.
it isn't equal.
Yeah.
And to some people, I think, like to act like they are. It's like, well, this is good. It's the same thing. Whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I'm not saying it's bad. I think it's fine, and you can hang out in a digital space and have some sense of community. But
Sure.
to think like that's the same,
Yeah.
is not.
Yeah. And we see that in our local churches too, right? Like
Right.
there's this premise of, well, I can see the best preachers everywhere online, and I
Right.
can listen to the best worship music ever online. And that may be technically true, but what you're gaining in great communication or beautiful orchestration, you're missing the whole point of the relationship of living life together, sharing life together, navigating this journey of what it
Yeah.
means to be a follower of Christ, which maybe it's easy for me to say. I'm willing to sacrifice great, perfect communication and amazing orchestration of worship to have relationship with
Yeah.
people and there be some authenticity to living life together.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and one other byproduct of this, I actually just saw this recently, that there was a news report that the number of children getting weight loss surgeries has increased like pretty dramatically. And so you mentioned the physical effects, but that's another physical effect. Is when you're doing this, you're not engaging in any sort of physical exercise.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Which of course has all sorts of, and that's true for all of us, but certainly for kids.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. Well, here's my challenge. I want to
Yep.
get your thoughts on this. I go back and forth on this because I'm like, my initial reaction is like, we got to fight this. Like, let's move our family to a farm and destroy all devices. And like, we're only going to live via candlelight. You know what I mean? But then this other part of me goes, well, we are also living in the midst of an evolving, transforming world, which is a digital world.
Yeah.
That's not going to change.
Yeah.
So the world is becoming more and more and more and more digital.
Yeah.
All jobs are becoming more and more digital. That's the future. So it's like, it's this balance of like trying to help my kids live in a healthy way, but also the recognition that these skills and
Sure.
this reality of this world is only going to become more digital. And so I also don't want to stunt them from, I don't want to be the old grandpa who's like, back in the day it was so good, and now, because that's every generation.
Sure.
Right? They feel
Because in
that way.
reality, like there's been some amazing things that have come about because of this, right?
Right.
Like, so maybe you didn't ask the question. Well, I'll let you finish.
Well, so that's the question, is like, how do we handle this?
Sure. Yeah.
Because I want to protect my kids from dangers, but I'm
Yeah.
also aware like this is the future and it's only
Sure.
moving more in that direction.
Yeah.
So I also don't want to stunt their ability and success to navigate that world.
Absolutely. So I think maybe the easiest analogy I could use to describe this would be just like any useful tool. If it's not used correctly, it can be super dangerous, right?
Yeah.
So, like for example, a vehicle, a car, a 2-ton vehicle that can go upwards to over 100 miles an hour. If I don't understand how to operate it correctly, it can be insanely dangerous, both for me and other people. But if I understand how to use it, if I understand its usefulness, if I understand the nuance of the rules and regulations that
Yeah.
we all agree to, then it's super useful to me. It allows me to navigate my world in ways that walking around wouldn't be able to. And so I think the digital world is the same way, right? Our hearts love taking good things and turning them into idols that we worship and things
Yeah.
that we just decay and destroy. That's just the nature of sin, right? The digital world is a prime example of that.
Mm.
So that's why, as accountable adult leaders in the life of teenagers and youth ministry, as parents, as healthy adults in general, the ways that we can help teenagers or young people understand, okay, what is this tool, this digital tool? I mean, we've got access to information like never before. That's a great thing. We also have access to a lot of garbage out there as well, and I have
Right.
to interpret what information I'm digesting and all those sorts of things. But I think those are all learnable skills. Those are traits that can be taught and learned. In the same way, we wouldn't just hand our teenager the keys to their brand new vehicle without teaching them how to use the vehicle. And it's our responsibility as adults to help them navigate that digital space as well.
Yeah. I think the problem is us as adults
Well, we got to set the
also don't
example.
know how to drive the car.
That's exactly right. Yeah, for sure. So that's a great point. Like obviously, I think us helping to understand that space is a big deal, and it seems like a daunting one because it's evolving so rapidly. It's
Yeah.
changing so quickly.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that we should just be like, ah, it's past me now. I can't. Hopefully those
No,
next ones
yeah.
will figure it out.
I
Leave it
feel
to
like
the millennials.
I feel like it's a conversation of overall health. Like in
Yeah.
the same way that if you're talking about your physical health, you're never like I've arrived, done, I'm done.
Yeah.
You're always kind of saying, and especially as we get older,
Yeah.
you start getting into your 40s and stuff. It's like you realize, no. Actually, that's an everyday thing.
Yeah.
And some days, some weeks, some months, I fail.
Yeah.
But I got to keep coming back and going like, okay, how do I get back on track? How do I help myself be healthier? Well, this is a part of the healthy conversation.
Sure.
How do I become healthier in this area?
Yeah.
So that I own technology, it doesn't own me.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah. So let's talk through some recommendations then, maybe as it relates to the youth leaders that are listening. Like it's not like we're gonna be like, all right, kids, now if you go to the internet, you want to make sure that like how would you start to have this conversation with teenagers as it relates? Let's just assume that they're all addicted because they are on some level.
Right.
And that's the intention of the app, of the social media platform. It is built around addiction in mind. It is how does the brain work? What does it want? And how do I keep feeding it? Because it's a numbers game.
Yeah.
So let's just assume they're all addicted to it because they are. That's just a fact, good, bad, or indifferent. How would you then start to have this conversation with, okay, in light of this, and let's presume that it's not realistic to be like, I'm just going to turn off all the power and unplug, set an EMP in the youth room so the kids can't access energy anymore.
You're like, oh, there goes my PowerPoint.
So where do we start to have that conversation?
I think we need to have the conversation around, and I've been using this term a lot when I've done youth leader training and stuff, is like, we need to have the conversation around the idea of human flourishing.
Yeah.
And like in a lot of different areas. So whether it's sexuality or whatever, but this is one of those areas. And with teenagers, to try to say to them, so two things. Number one, technology has the potential to prevent your flourishing. Like there's a reality that some of this is not good for you, and not paint it as the devil, like you said, but good things limited properly can maintain being good things in our lives.
Yeah.
Good things without the limitations properly can become very bad things in our life.
Sure, yeah.
So number one, like what's beneficial for our flourishing. But the other piece that I think we need to start having a conversation about is the importance for the next generation to understand that depriving ourselves of things that are good help keep them good.
Mm.
So whether that, could be anything, but I think this generation more than ever, like talk about idolatry, their primary heart idol is this idol of comfort.
Yeah.
Like the chief aim in life is just to fill my life with whatever things bring me comfort, a joy, avoid pain, and certainly like technology has that
Sure.
ability to just numb us and just like you said, just keep us in this like cycle of never. So helping them understand like what are some things that are hard to do, but if I do them and I daily do them, they're going to result in a greater level of flourishing in my life. You're going to be happier.
Yeah.
Right. And if they can start to try those behaviors on, they'll find that they are happier, which at the end of the day is a big win because many of them are not happy. Many of them are depressed. And so if we can figure out how to do that, like, hey, what would it look like for you to intentionally limit yourself?
Sure.
Or what would it look like for you to intentionally change this small behavior and do this little thing differently every single day?
Yeah.
And then look at how it makes you feel.
I even love the idea of instead of communicating with teenagers limitations, talk about priorities. We want to prioritize these things, and as a result of that, there's a natural limiting that takes place of these other things, right? That's how I would recommend communicating it to your young kids. Like instead of being like, you get an hour of whatever of your digital time of YouTube of whatever, which is what I do with my kids. Instead, I should be like, hey, let's spend an hour reading first, and then you can have some screen time. It's a beautiful morning. Let's get outside in the cool of the morning for a couple hours. Then when we come in, you can spend some time watching a show or playing a game or something like that. So, but communicating what we want to prioritize first, I think, and helping them understand why are these good things for me, then begins to create some balance, at least I hope, in. But if it's always like a limitation, then as soon as that limitation doesn't exist by the authority, then you just totally indulge yourself in that thing, right? Or if you're like, I don't care about the limitation any longer. But if I got priorities in my head, then I'm moving towards things of health versus limiting things of unhealth, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And another way that you could say it when you're talking to teenagers too is to say you realize that part of the attraction of the digital space and interacting with each other is that it's safer, it's less vulnerable.
Yeah.
Like when I'm sitting with you in a room, person to person, I'm putting myself out there more. The potential of rejection is higher. The potential of like me risking, like, I don't know what you're going to say or how you're going to react. When you do that digitally, it's a little bit safer. It's like a wall that's removed there where it feels like, okay, well, I can always just log off, or maybe I'm not even seeing them, or I'm just, you know what I mean? And so communicating to teenagers, like, we have to understand part of the attraction of this is we feel like it's safer, like we're more protected, but it's inhibiting our ability to really know each other. And what it's doing is, because of those walls, it's actually making us lonelier. And I think when we're honest about that, they can relate. They're like, yeah, the truth is I do feel lonely.
Yeah. I think most of some of the statistics and some of the studies I was reading, most of the more destructive behaviors are isolated behaviors as well, whether it be pornography, whether it be just the constant scrolling and looking and comparing. And it's not the in community and relationships, doing collaborating together stuff. It is those isolation. And my guess is, I didn't see this statistic. There probably is one out there somewhere for it. My guess is the overwhelming majority of that screen time is spent in isolation, not in communication or relation.
Right. So that was actually one of the tips that I would give to youth leaders or parents or any of that. One of the ways that we can leverage technology, and we try to do this with our kids, is we are way more open to the fact of them using their games and iPads and stuff like that if they are playing with friends of theirs on some sort of
versus watching someone play the game,
right? Or just playing by themselves.
Yeah.
So if my kids, and they do this oftentimes, and this all started with the pandemic, but they've carried on. If they're on a like a Zoom call, they don't use Zoom, but if they're on a call with each other, right, FaceTime or whatever, and they are all playing a game together, I'm way more inclined to let my son or daughter do that.
Sure.
Because there at least is, and again, it's not the same as in person, but there at least is a social interaction.
Yeah.
They're communicating with each other. They're arguing with each other. They're learning and using
discussing strategy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's more of it's less isolating. And I have found that, let's say my kids do that for 2 hours versus be by themselves playing for 2 hours, their disposition's different.
Oh yeah.
You know?
Absolutely.
So
yeah, and in the same light, I find that they're less possessive too. Like if my kid's just watching a show by themselves and one of their siblings come up next to them, usually it's like what like get away from me,
like Smeagol with the ring, Lord of the Rings,
like looking at those, versus if they're doing something collaboratively or together for sure. But yeah, absolutely. I think the intention, the again, the positive way versus the what you can indulge in negatively, like the access that we have to one another, to affinity groups, to like-minded people because of the digital world we live in is huge. But then the opposite is also true, is I can spend mindless hours just
but
indulging myself.
That's a great way in youth ministry to leverage technology. It's like, hey, if you're into video games, even if you're not, set up a group chat with everybody, invite students in, because they're going to be on anyway. They're going to be doing their thing anyway. Now, guess what? They're hanging out with you while they're doing it and laughing at you when you're terrible at video games.
Exactly.
So it's a win-win.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. I think another thing that is important for us, you spoke of the heart idol of comfort. I think approval is another one of the areas of deepest hurt and pain as it relates to the mental health piece, especially as it relates to teenagers. It's that comparison game. It's the desire for likes. It's and again, all of this is built into, like, that's what's kind of gross about some of this social media piece, is like they're constructed around that need, around that desire to get comments, to get likes, to get subscriptions, to get approval. And when we don't get it, it psychologically jacks with us and creates a lot of pain, a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. That constant being plugged into what's happening around the world, and that fear of missing out, the anxiety that it creates. You see somebody that's at a party or hanging out with a group of friends and you weren't invited, and of course our heart immediately goes to they don't even care about me, they didn't reach out to me, or there's no positive assumption of, oh, they know I've got this usually after school, so they were like, she'll probably be busy, we'll catch her next time. No, it's, oh, I'm on the outside now, I'm not with them, I'm not connected to them any longer. And it's amazing how quickly our heart turns to that versus the positive potential, like, oh, I'm so glad they're hanging out, like that's going to be great for them, like but that isolation that's created in the digital world, I think, is probably one of the most dangerous things that it does to our hearts.
Absolutely.
That fear of not being approved, not being accepted, not being connected.
Absolutely. Yeah, we were made to be in community, we're made to be in relationship with each other, and it's going to be interesting. I am worried and concerned, but also just curious as to see where the future takes us, because this problem is not going away. It's only going to get worse when you talk about things like the metaverse and AI and virtual reality, and it's not far-fetched to think in the not too distant future, people will be in these fully immersive digital worlds that are almost impossible to differentiate from reality.
Have you seen Ready Player One?
Yeah.
Like the technology, if is not already there, it is on the cusp of us just living in the digital world.
Right.
We work to unlock things in the digital space, through the digital space, and we can just totally escape from the reality of my world into this digital world where I get to be whatever I want to be, whoever I want to be. And I think you're already seeing that spill out into the quote unquote analog world that we live in right now, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And we have no idea what that means for humanity and what that will do to people. And but I think we have to keep an open mind and do the best that we can to pursue things that we know create health in us and in teenagers. And
Yeah. So as we conclude here a little bit, what are there any quick gospel principles that we can share with the adult leaders that are listening, or even teens if they happen to jump in here, as it relates to, okay, how do we protect and guard our hearts as it relates to the digital world? So obviously for me, the one that kind of jumps out the most is if we're looking for some sort of approval,
Yeah.
right, in the digital space that's not God's already approved relationship with me, right, that was proven by his son Jesus Christ dying for my sin. If I'm trying to get approval from anywhere else, it's going to set my heart up for disaster, right?
Yeah.
So that's one gospel principle. Who do I really want approval from?
Yeah.
If it's someone on the other side of the digital screen, I'm potentially setting myself up for hurt and pain.
Right.
What are some other things you can think of?
Well, and in that situation, the gospel truth is, if the creator of the universe has approved of me,
Yeah.
what does it matter what anyone else thinks? That's not the definer of my worth and value. So, yeah, for me, I would say the going back to the comfort idol, like the gospel truth of that is, I don't have to avoid uncomfortable things because God experienced the most amount of uncomfortable thing to secure my comfort for all of eternity.
Yeah.
So that's the truth that I remind myself is like, discomfort in the temporary is actually can be good for me.
Yeah.
And I have to force myself to do that. So when you're talking to teenagers, like, it's really important for us to force ourselves to do. That's why we exercise, and that's why we try to eat better, and that's why we try, that's why we need to go outside and get sunlight on us, and that's why we need, in the same way, that's why we need to detach ourselves from technology in an intentional fashion away. That's why we need to force ourselves to be around people in a social setting, even if it makes us uncomfortable, or makes us worried. We have to force ourselves to do uncomfortable things, because at the end of the day, that's what is not only good for us and our own identity, but it's also what's good for our mission to help the people around us and the community that we live in. And so I think that's one of the gospel truths that's really important. And the lie that's connected to is oftentimes, when I feel something, then I'll do something. So behavior follows feelings,
Right.
when in reality it's the inverse. It's behavior comes first, and then feelings flow out of that. So as I'm disciplined in my behavior, then my feelings will come from that.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I think one of the last things I would add to this too is just this idea of identity, right? We've had a couple of different conversations regarding identity, but I think one of the things I hear a lot of as it relates to the digital world is people are able to find their other people. They're able to identify with other individuals and find their affinity group and find like-minded people. And I don't have any problem with finding like-minded people, but when my identity is steeped in this little nuance or this unique quirk that we all have together, or this unique taste that I have, versus the identity that we see as followers of Jesus, as to who God says we are, son of God, daughter of a child of God, and we're trying to find our identity in some other space, like that's linked, of course, to all the other things as well. That's where we're preaching a false gospel to ourselves and trying to find our worth in our identity in a digital world that we're hoping will say the things we want it to say. And we can find those things, but they're just not sustainable, and all they do is kind of corrode and destroy what's inside of us, right? Yeah.
So takeaway is, good luck. We have no chance here.
Yeah. If you want to play in the devil's playground,
It's going down. The question is, how quick? So, no, hopefully you're encouraged that this is a nuanced topic, and there's a lot of good and a lot of bad, and we've got to try to navigate it and figure it out. And thankfully, with the wisdom of God and His grace, we can try to help navigate our own self through it, but also young people and teenagers that we're ministering to. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, guys. We'll see you on the next episode. Appreciate you.